everyone, it's Molly again. I have a new first chapter Friday to share with you. This is a new young adult book that we have here at the library. This is Enter the Body by Joy McCullough, and this is a contemporary take on some of Shakespeare's plays, featuring a few of the female characters in some of those stories that he wrote. So we're going to jump into this. I'm going to read the synopsis first, and then we'll talk about some of the genres this fits into. We'll talk about the Goodreads reviews like we usually do. Then we'll go ahead and read the first chapter. So let's jump right into the synopsis first. Enter the Body gives voice to a cast of the young women who die in Shakespeare's most iconic plays. Focusing on the stories of Juliet, Ophelia, and Cordelia, best-selling author of Blood, Water, Paint, Joy McCullough, brilliantly weaves retellings of Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, and King Lear into a larger story of young women reclaiming their stories in the aftermath of trauma. And there's a quote after that. That's the power of the story. Even when they know how it will turn out, there's the spark of hope that this time might be different. So that kind of might be some foreshadowing that these retellings will be a little bit different than the original Shakespeare versions. Like I said, this is contemporary, so we have a little bit more contemporary takes on these stories. We'll talk about on Goodreads. I always love going to Goodreads. I get a lot of good information on there. So I highly recommend you go to that. You can put a wish list on there for things you want to read. They give you recommendations. It's really awesome. So Goodreads gives it an average rating of a 4.04 stars out of 282 ratings on the website, and there's 106 reviews that some readers have actually given it. This fits into, like I said, young adult, historical fiction, poetry, retellings, and contemporary, because this is a contemporary version. Michael L. Prince, award winner, of Bone Gap, said that this once tender, poetic, and ferocious Enter the Body brings new life into the bard's most tragic heroines. More than a tribute to Shakespeare, this kaleidoscope ambitious novel in verse gives Juliet, Ophelia, Cordelia, and Lavinia the chance to tell their own stories, full of passion, justice, sisterhood, and love. Simply spectacular. Another reader said this was a very interesting take on Shakespeare. She liked the feminist explorations of some of the characters that didn't get their due in their stories. Someone else said this was beautiful and smart, liked how the author pointed out what so many of Shakespeare's female characters had in common. I don't want to give away too much or any spoilers, so I'm not going to read the rest of that one. Someone else said they really enjoyed the book. Many readers loved it. McCullough's book was also great for teachers. So if you're a teacher, more specifically a secondary English teacher, you might want to incorporate this book into your classes for your students. Okay, so let's go ahead and read the first chapter of this. And the first chapter is called Trap Room. The trap room beneath all the stages anywhere. The ghost light is perpetually on, but it illuminates very little, which makes it easier to keep to oneself. That woman with blood on her hands, for example, always wanders into the same corner every time she crashes through that great stage of fools to the space beneath, muttering to herself, but never to anyone else. The one in the nightgown with strangle marks around her neck, clutching a handkerchief like it'll save her from these men, she usually heads to a corner too after the fall, but only because she doesn't know what else to do. It's a room, but there are infinite corners. Enough for everyone to avoid the zealot in singed armor who reeks of the fire that burned her, or the wild-eyed queen who looks as though she died a dozen deaths before she drank the poison that brought her here. The sisters who killed one another definitely need their own corners. They crash through again and again, these women, while the boards above their heads creak with the trotting of the ones who live or die in glory. It gets to be monotonous. But now comes a girl the others aren't accustomed to. It's not that she hasn't been down here before. In fact, she arrived before the rest of them, a violent splotch of ink from the quill of the bard so young he hadn't yet mastered his instrument. She's the first draft to his later masterpieces. Without her, they don't exist, and yet they can be forgiven for not remembering her the moment they see her, They do their level best to shove her from their minds. You would too, only I won't let you. The jolt this first draft girl receives when her body crumples to the ground is the least of her concerns. Those concerns are pretty evenly tied between the blood that gushes from her mouth and also from the end of each arm where hands should be, but hands are not. She doesn't even bother uncrumpling. What would be the point? But there's one woman under this stage compelled to help her, one who has known violence herself and is young enough to remember, while old enough to imagine herself maternal, even if she never survives to bear a child. This maternal one, in a flimsy nightgown that is by design transparent when stage light hits it exactly right, approaches the bloody heap. She strokes the girl's hair, soothes the frightened creature until she looks up. The woman startles. For a moment, she's not certain whether this girl is prey or predator. Perhaps she is covered in someone else's blood. She is, but not at her choosing. And her lack of hands offers irrefutable evidence that the girl herself has been on the receiving end of some significant evil. The woman brings forth her handkerchief, the one that causes her such endless trouble on the stage above. She might as well put it to productive use while she has the chance. It's a ridiculous thing, flimsy as her nightdress and no match for the ghastly amounts of blood streaming down the girl's face, but wielded by one who wishes to be of use if it somehow does what it's meant to do. The girl is still wrecked, that cannot be undone, but she's no longer a horror show, and after everything she's been through, the miracle is not that she lives, but that she does not want to be alone. She still craves company. She resists the corners. This girl, her name is Lavinia. Names are important even if no one says them. Let's say she's 19. She considers her options. The woman with the handkerchief has already retreated. The woman in the corners are there for a reason. There are other girls who want nothing to do with corners, though. Cordelia, 17, sits in the center of it all. Bedraggled, she's clearly been through something. But it's more important than anything that she keep it together, that you not see the struggle. And nearby, another girl, Ophelia, 15, is soaking wet, absolutely drenched. There may be a few leaves in her hair. Lavinia watches these girls, calligraphy to her splotch of ink, who resist the corners. They see her, but their gazes glance off her. They're shoving her from their minds, like I said they would. In fairness, they both have a lot going on, even if they aren't missing appendages. Ophelia is not okay, but she's not trying to conceal it. She's soaking wet, after all. It's pretty hard to hide that something has gone awry. She doesn't just walk around like this normally with pond scum clinging to her dress. This is not usual, except for every time the water drags her down and she crashes into this purgatory. Cordelia is used to ignoring Ophelia, but now this girl is here, watching, disturbing the norms of the trap room. Cordelia thought she was alone. She's used to being alone. Her own sisters are there, each in their own corners, and even they don't glance toward her. It's not that Cordelia likes it this way. It's just the only way it's ever been, even up above. And how on earth is she supposed to adjust to something new at this point? Anyway, here they are. For a while, time doesn't mean much in this place. They've just arrived, or maybe they've languished for an eternity when Juliet crashes through. Juliet, age 13, is also not okay. This is evidenced by the dagger in her heart. She's making a big production of it, too. Even Cordelia can't look away as the girl wrenches the dagger from her chest and makes a show of figuring out where to put it, like it matters. Ophelia considers approaching her, helping her. She's not sure how, or if she's allowed, as though there are rules here. But when your world has been composed entirely of rules that landed you here, in fact, it's a difficult adjustment. Lavinia flinches at the sight of the dagger. She's safe now, at least until she's called back up and it starts all over again. But logic is nothing against her memories of what a blade can do. Anyway, it's not like she could help. She doesn't have hands. Cordelia works hard to act as though the others aren't there. She has had enough of dramatic, bleeding girls to last a lifetime, or an eternity, as it were. Once Juliet figures out the dagger situation, all she has to do is release it and it's gone, which is a lesson that might have been valuable to learn sooner, but this eternity has no time for his regret. Her gaze lands on Lavinia, and then darts away. I told you it would, and searches desperately for something else, someone else to latch onto. It's harder for Juliet to shove Lavinia from her mind. Perhaps it's their shared experience with daggers. Perhaps it's her youth. She would have nightmares if sleep were permitted here. Ophelia allows her eye to be caught. She understands Juliet's panic and glances apologetically toward Cordelia, as though it's her fault this other girl won't acknowledge their presence. Juliet isn't bothered. It won't be the first time she's been required to wrest attention from the unwilling. Okay, so that is the first chapter of Enter the Body, and you can see some contemporary themes going on so far. First off, the way that the story is told so far is not like Shakespeare's language. Shakespeare has a very unique language that he uses in his plays, if you are familiar. So we have more contemporary verbiage, use of words in this first chapter, and so far it's kind of, we can see where the title comes from, Enter the Body, because these girls from Shakespeare's original stories are just, they're entering this trap room, which is a room under a stage, which is something that's known in history of playwriting and such. They enter into this trap room and they're dead. They've died. They have been maimed. They died tragically. They've been through something awful. So they're kind of in this purgatory type situation. Which that's really interesting. So they are dead girls. So that's where we get Into the Body. So it's very interesting so far. And I want to point out that the first chapter, the way that it's written like in plays where you have the first paragraph or first part of the story is italicized, and that's how this whole first chapter was, because it's like a way to start a play, start the story. It's kind of giving you the scene. So the scene that we have is these girls in Shakespeare's stories who have died, and they're in this purgatory type world situation under the stage. So I really think that this is going to be interesting. And then the rest of the story, I noticed in the second chapter, it's a poem, A Rose by Another Name. So it looks like a lot of it is written in poems, and then you have certain parts of the story where it's italicized again. So like in this, on page 15, it has the trap room again. Everything's italicized because it's setting up the scene for you again. So I really think that that's interesting. I like that it's written in poems. We don't really see that a whole lot, but being that it's based on Shakespeare, that does make sense. So that kind of gives you more of the Shakespeare feel while reading a contemporary young adult novel. So I hope that you enjoyed this first chapter Friday for this book. I will be back again to give you another first chapter Friday soon, so stay tuned for that. I hope everyone has a great weekend.